The cameras were already rolling before anyone realized what was happening. A gust of November wind swept across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, rattling the Union Jack that hung limply above the gates. Reporters, half frozen and confused, murmured among themselves. Then the door opened, and out stepped Prince William, the man the entire United Kingdom had been taught since childhood to see as their future king, pale, rigid, and visibly shaken. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Effective immediately, he began, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. I will be stepping back from all royal duties. Crowd gasped. The microphones crackled. 1,000 questions ignited in the air, but William didn't wait for them. He simply lowered his eyes, folded his statement, and walked away. What could possibly drive the heir to the British throne to say those words? What could make the man raised to embody tradition, loyalty, and duty, the man once called the stable heart of the monarchy, declare that he was done? Something inside him had broken. But what? Was it the relentless pressure of carrying a centuries-old institution on his shoulders? Was it the private battles no one saw behind the smiling photographs? Or was it something darker? Something that forced him to choose between the truth and the throne? Tonight, we pull back the royal curtain. We go inside the walls of palaces that have seen more secrets than any courtroom. We revisit the days leading to that jaw-dropping moment when Prince William stunned not just the UK, but the entire world by saying, "I'm resigning." And believe me, this isn't just a story about power. It's a story about a man trapped between legacy and love, image and identity, crown and conscience. Imagine being born into a destiny you never asked for. Every move rehearsed, every emotion scrutinized. For most of us, growing up means discovering who we are. For William, it meant being told who he must be. But as he stood before those cameras, one could see something flicker in his expression, not defeat, but liberation. The kind of look you get when you finally stop pretending. Before we go there, ask yourself this. What if you were raised to believe your life wasn't yours? That even your silence could spark headlines? Would you play along or walk away? William's decision didn't happen overnight. The cracks began years ago, small at first, barely noticeable, but they spread through family dinners, through late-night phone calls, through the unspoken grief that haunted him since the day he lost his mother. People say trauma fades with time, but inside the royal bubble, pain doesn't heal, it hides. And sometimes it hides so long that when it resurfaces, it explodes. In the weeks before the announcement, palace insiders whispered about tension, missed meetings, and a new kind of distance between father and son. Charles wanted control. William wanted purpose. One was born to rule, the other was born to question why. Those whispers became louder after one private meeting ended with slamming doors. It wasn't the first time the Windsors had clashed behind the scenes. But this one, sources say, felt final, like the ending of an era. At the center of it all was a letter. A letter written decades earlier, in handwriting that William recognized instantly, his mother's. It had been kept in the royal archives for years, a sealed envelope marked for William when the time is right. The time, apparently, had come. No one outside the palace knew what was in that letter. But those who saw William afterward said he was different, quieter, heavier, more introspective. And it wasn't just the letter. It was what it confirmed. That for all the talk of duty and legacy, there had been secrets buried deep beneath the palace floors, secrets that, if revealed, could destroy the illusion of the perfect royal family forever. You see, William's story is not just about escape. It's about revelation. And tonight, as we trace the final days before his resignation, you'll discover how far one man had to go to tell the truth, and what he had to sacrifice to do it. Think about this for a moment. Every crown sits on the weight of history. But what if that history is rotten? What if the symbol of unity is built on betrayal? Could you still wear it with pride? That was the question haunting William. The British public saw the polished prince, the perfect husband, the loving father. But behind the palace gates, he was a man unraveling, torn between two impossible worlds. On one hand, the monarchy demanded obedience. On the other, his conscience demanded honesty. And in the end, conscience won. In those final weeks, something shifted in William's tone. He began canceling engagements, declining briefings, and avoiding photo ops. Even Catherine, ever composed, seemed uneasy. The cameras captured her smiles, but they missed the silence that followed once the red lights went off. Friends close to the couple said he had grown restless, angry even. But not the explosive kind of anger, the quiet one that builds slowly until it breaks you. And when it broke live on national television. The press called it an abdication of spirit. The palace called it temporary. But William called it what it was, the only honest thing he'd ever done. Still, the announcement itself was only half the story. The real shock lies in what pushed him there. A confrontation no one was supposed to hear, a disappearance no one could explain, and a discovery that tied it all together. For years, William carried the monarchy like a burden passed down from one wounded soul to another. But now, he was ready to drop it. And he did. In front of millions. The moment spread like wildfire. Television anchors stammered. Commentators speculated. Social media exploded with disbelief. Some called him a coward, others called him a hero. But everyone agreed on one thing. Nothing in the royal family would ever be the same again. Even the king was blindsided. It was supposed to be a routine briefing, a short statement about new charity initiatives. Instead, it became a royal earthquake. Within minutes, Buckingham's phone lines were jammed. Advisors scrambled to rewrite press releases. The Queen's old confidants, those still loyal to her memory, reportedly wept. The monarchy had faced scandals before. Affairs, leaks, betrayals. But this, the heir to the throne rejecting the throne itself, was unthinkable. And yet, if you looked closely, maybe it wasn't so surprising. The warning signs had been there all along. In his eyes, his pauses, his subtle defiance during speeches. People just didn't want to see them. Because believing William could walk away meant questioning everything the monarchy stood for. But he wasn't alone in his decision. Someone else had helped him reach it. Someone whose silence had been misread as consent for far too long. Catherine. Those close to her say she had grown weary, too. Of the gossip, the expectations, the constant balancing act between being perfect and being human. In her own quiet way, she'd been preparing for this moment. A life beyond the palace, beyond titles, beyond the endless performance. And yet, even she didn't know how soon that moment would come. There's a reason William's statement didn't mention her directly. Some believe it was protection, others, strategy. But what's clear is that the two had made a decision long before the cameras rolled. A decision that risked everything, their reputation, their legacy, even their safety. Because when a royal walks away, the system doesn't applaud. It retaliates. The weeks that followed were chaos. Leaks from unnamed sources. Rumors of exile. Talk of mental instability planted in sympathetic papers. It was all too familiar. A playbook once used against another woman who had dared to challenge the crown. And that realization struck William like lightning. The same forces that broke his mother were circling again, this time around his own family. So he chose to end the cycle. He didn't bow. He didn't apologize. He just resigned. The man once destined to lead the monarchy had now declared himself free from it. But freedom comes at a price, and his was only beginning. Because the moment he walked away, something happened behind those palace doors. Something no reporter captured, no statement addressed. A meeting, a confrontation, and a revelation that would change everything Britain thought it knew about its future king. You think you know Prince William's story? Think again. Because the resignation wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a truth the palace had buried for decades. And as the world applauded or condemned him, one quiet detail escaped notice. Before he left the podium that day, William slipped a folded piece of paper back into his jacket pocket. The same envelope he had opened weeks earlier. The one marked, "For William, when the time is right." What was in that letter? What could possibly make a prince defy a crown? You'll find out soon. But before that, you need to understand the moment that truly broke the future king. The confrontation that turned duty into rebellion. It began on a gray afternoon. The kind that makes London feel smaller, heavier, suffocating. The clouds hung low, swallowing the spires of Westminster, and the air carried that damp, electric tension that always seems to precede history. The palace courtyard was unusually silent. No fanfare, no polished brass bands. Only the sound of hurried footsteps and whispers that carried like ghosts through the cold wind. Prince William stood alone in his private office, staring at a stack of papers on his desk. A pen lay in front of him. The same pen he'd used to sign countless royal decrees, letters, and ceremonial acknowledgments. But this one felt different. Because this time, he wasn't signing in service to the crown. He was signing against it. A single sentence stared back at him, black ink on crisp stationery bearing the royal crest. I, Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, hereby resign from my official duties and relinquish all responsibilities pertaining to the succession. His hand trembled as he traced those words. You could almost hear his heartbeat echoing in that empty room. It wasn't fear that held him back, it was the gravity of choice. The understanding that once that signature touched the page, there would be no undoing it. No press statement could spin it. No advisor could bury it. It would be the end of a legacy he'd carried since birth. He thought of his grandmother, her unwavering composure, her devotion to duty, her belief that the monarchy must always stand above emotion. And for the first time, he dared to disagree. Because what good is a crown, he thought, if it crushes the person beneath it? Outside, aides were pacing. The king had been informed that William was considering a statement. The phrase itself sounded diplomatic, harmless, until the word resign appeared in the whispers. Then everything changed. Inside the palace, tension thickened like fog. You could feel it in every hallway. The shuffle of nervous staff, the muffled phone calls, the strained glances between people who suddenly didn't know where to look. But William didn't flinch. He'd been silent long enough. What finally broke him wasn't one incident. It was the accumulation, years of silence, of watching truth twisted into spectacle, of smiling through pain so the tabloids wouldn't feast on it. The cameras might have captured his grin at public events, but not the sleepless nights when he wondered if his children would one day resent him for keeping them in this life. He had tried to fix things quietly. He'd spoken to his father about reform, about modernizing, about cutting back on the outdated rituals that made the monarchy feel detached from reality. But every time, the conversation ended the same way. That's not how we do things, William. That phrase haunted him. It was the motto of an institution chained to its own reflection. And it was during one particularly tense family meeting, the one now whispered about as the breaking point, that the last thread finally snapped. It had been a private gathering at Sandringham, just days before Christmas. Charles sat by the fire, papers in hand, while William stood near the window, his reflection merging with the gray English sky. You can't simply redefine monarchy, William, Charles said, not looking up from his briefing notes. It's not a company you can rebrand. With all due respect, Father, William replied, his voice tight but controlled. People don't trust us anymore. They don't relate to us. They see extravagance when they're struggling to pay their bills. You can't pretend the old ways still work. Charles finally looked up, eyes narrowing. And what do you suggest? Abdication? An apology tour? No, William said quietly. I suggest honesty. The room went silent. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Charles leaned forward. You're your mother's son, he said coldly. And you know where that led her. That sentence cut deeper than any royal duty ever had. It wasn't just cruel, it was revealing. Because in that moment, William realized something devastating. His father didn't fear losing power. He feared losing control of the narrative. And William was no longer willing to play the character the monarchy had written for him. The conversation ended without resolution. William walked out, past the portraits of ancestors who had ruled for centuries, and saw not pride, but burden. Every face in those gilded frames seemed to demand obedience. But obedience had already cost him too much. That night, Catherine found him on the balcony, staring at the horizon. The children were asleep. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the wind through the trees. Are you all right? She asked softly. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, I can't do it anymore, Kate. I can't be the perfect prince. Not if it means becoming everything I hate. She didn't try to stop him. She just took his hand and whispered, then don't. That was the moment. Not the press conference. Not the official resignation letter. That quiet exchange between husband and wife. That was when the future king broke free. But freedom came with fear. The palace had a way of fighting back, subtle but lethal. The next morning, a headline appeared in a sympathetic tabloid. Prince William under pressure, struggling with role. It was the first hint of the campaign that would follow. Whispered doubts, mental health speculation, anonymous quotes about instability. The same tactics once used against his mother were being revived, this time against him. And that's when he made his decision. If they were going to paint him as unfit, he'd give them something real to talk about. He picked up his pen, the same one that signed countless official documents in the name of duty. Only this time, he would use it to reclaim his own life. When the ink dried, something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt human again. He leaned back in his chair, the silence heavy but liberating. In the hallway outside, his private secretary stood frozen, holding his phone. "Sir," the man stammered, "His Majesty wants to know." William interrupted. "Tell him I've made my decision." The aide hesitated. "And what shall I tell the press?" William's reply was simple. "Tell them the truth." Within hours, the statement was prepared. The palace tried to delay it, hoping to negotiate the language, to soften the blow. But William refused. "If I don't say it myself," he told his team, "someone else will twist it." So he walked out into the courtyard, past the cameras, and said it himself. "I will be stepping back from all royal duties." The reaction was instant chaos. Gasps, shouts, reporters firing questions like gunfire. "Are you abdicating? Is the king ill? Is this about your brother?" William said nothing more. He simply folded the statement and turned away. But behind that calm exit was a storm brewing, one that would shake the monarchy from the inside out. Because while the world focused on what he said, they missed what he didn't say. He didn't mention the argument. He didn't mention the letter. He didn't mention the discovery that had changed his view of everything. A discovery buried in a locked archive room beneath Kensington Palace. That's where it began to unravel. Because not long before the press conference, William had stumbled upon something he was never meant to see, a set of documents connected to his mother's final years. Letters exchanged between her and an unnamed royal aide. Letters that hinted at a secret arrangement, one that could rewrite royal history if ever exposed. He had read one line over and over again. "If they can't silence me, they'll break the ones who come after me." For days, that line haunted him. It explained so much: the manipulation, the public pressure, the subtle threats. And it made one thing clear. The monarchy wasn't built to protect its heirs. It was built to protect itself. By the time he finished reading, he knew there was no way back. The system his mother once tried to expose hadn't changed. It had only evolved. That was the real moment the future king broke. Not in front of cameras, but alone, under the dim glow of an office lamp, realizing that his entire life had been scripted by people who saw him as a brand, not a man. When he finally stepped out that day, the resignation wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was an act of truth. He knew it would cause chaos. He knew it might even endanger his family. But he also knew silence would destroy him faster than scandal ever could. In the hours after his statement, Buckingham Palace went into emergency mode. Crisis meetings were held. Advisors argued about damage control. The king reportedly slammed his desk and shouted, "He's ruined everything." But maybe, just maybe, William wasn't ruining anything. Maybe he was saving what was left of it by telling the truth no one else dared to speak. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about every royal who'd been crushed under the same impossible expectations. And yet, as he left that courtyard and disappeared behind the palace doors, there was one person whose reaction mattered most: his father's. Charles hadn't spoken to him since the letter surfaced. Their last exchange ended with anger, not understanding. But that night, a royal car was seen leaving Buckingham under heavy escort. Inside, according to sources, was the king himself. He wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to confront. And what happened during that confrontation, the words exchanged, the accusations thrown, would push William from resignation to revelation. Because what Charles told him that night didn't just justify his decision. It confirmed every fear he'd ever had about the monarchy's darkest secret. And it left him with one final question, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What if the royal bloodline itself wasn't what he thought it was? But that, dear viewer, is where this story turns from resignation to reckoning. Because the next chapter, the one that begins inside that cold, candlelit palace office, will expose a truth so explosive it nearly brought down the monarchy itself. From the outside, Buckingham Palace has always appeared eternal, a fortress of marble and myth, where the air itself seems laced with ceremony. The world even suspected anything was wrong, and at the heart of it all was a single, unspoken truth. The institution of monarchy had stopped feeling human. William had sensed it early on. As a boy, he'd watched his mother weep behind closed doors, the weight of her isolation pressing on her like armor she couldn't remove. Later, as a man, he watched history repeat itself, not in tragedy, but in quiet, suffocating control. He'd tried to adapt, to play the role expected of him. The modern prince, the calm successor, the bridge between the old and the new. But beneath the polished exterior, frustration grew. Because every time he tried to modernize the institution, he met the same response: polite smiles, quiet resistance, and that familiar phrase whispered behind his back: "He doesn't understand how things work." But he understood perfectly. He just didn't agree. Inside the palace, power isn't exercised through shouting or orders. It's done through small gestures: who's invited to a meeting, whose memo is quietly ignored, whose project is under review indefinitely. It's a chessboard where every move is measured, and William had started making moves they didn't like. It began with his insistence on transparency, a word that made senior courtiers flinch. He wanted public access to royal finances, streamlined charity spending, and an end to the opaque hierarchy that allowed certain figures to operate unchecked. To the public, it sounded noble. To the palace, it sounded dangerous. Because transparency, in a system built on mystique, is poison. The first sign of pushback came when one of William's proposals mysteriously leaked to the press, distorted, twisted, and presented as a radical attempt to commercialize the monarchy. It wasn't. It was simply accountability. But in palace politics, perception is everything. When he confronted his father about it, Charles avoided eye contact. "You're young," he said calmly. "You'll understand in time that not everything can be explained to the public." "But why not?" William shot back. "They pay for all of it. Don't they deserve to know?" Charles sighed. "They deserve reassurance, not details." It was that kind of logic, centuries old and endlessly repeated, that frustrated him most. And then there were the staff. The courtiers, the faceless machinery behind the crown. To outsiders, they're servants of duty. To insiders, they're gatekeepers of power. Some had served under the queen for decades, loyal not to people, but to tradition itself. To them, William's push for modernization wasn't reform. It was rebellion. So they began isolating him in subtle ways. A meeting moved without notice. A document withheld until too late. A phone call forgotten. It was death by 1,000 courtesies. Even Catherine noticed it. Her briefings became inconsistent. Her calendar was changed without approval. It was as if the palace itself was trying to remind them who was really in control. One night, as they sat in their living room at Kensington Palace, William told her, "They're testing me." She looked up from her tea. "Who?" He hesitated. "Everyone." The tension grew heavier when the subject of succession came up. Charles had long planned for a streamlined monarchy, fewer working royals, less public exposure, tighter control over image. But William's vision was the opposite. He wanted openness, engagement, authenticity, things that didn't fit neatly into press releases. Their clash over image became personal. During a strategy meeting, William suggested a televised outreach with everyday Britons, nurses, teachers, farmers, without the usual press choreography. Charles frowned. "That's not our role, William. We're not politicians." "I'm not talking about politics," William replied. "I'm talking about relevance." The king's tone sharpened. "Relevance doesn't keep the monarchy alive. Respect does." William stood, his voice calm, but his eyes cold. "Respect isn't inherited, father. It's earned." The room fell silent. Advisors shifted uncomfortably. That sentence would later echo through the palace halls, repeated with horror, as if he'd blasphemed. Because inside Buckingham, challenging authority isn't just rebellion, it's heresy. And so, the quiet campaign began. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. Stories started leaking to the press about strained relations between the king and his son. Anonymous sources hinted at increasing instability and family rifts. William didn't need to ask where they came from. The royal press office has many doors, but only one master key. Still, he tried to rise above it. He focused on his causes: homelessness initiatives, mental health awareness, environmental campaigns. But even those were quietly undermined. Funds that had once flowed freely to his projects were suddenly redirected. Meetings he'd planned months in advance were rescheduled or canceled. His office began receiving reminders that all royal statements had to be pre-approved by the palace communications secretary. In short, they clipped his wings. And yet, the harder they tried to contain him, the more determined he became. Because William had inherited something from his mother. Not her fame, not her charm, but her stubborn sense of justice. And that's when the real tension started, not between father and son, but between two visions of monarchy itself. Charles believed in preservation, the art of maintaining power by appearing unchanged. William believed in evolution, the survival of the monarchy through transformation. It was a philosophical war fought through protocol, paperwork, and performance. But there was another layer, one far more personal. Deep down, Charles saw William not just as his successor, but as his rival. The public adored William. His approval ratings soared higher than any royal in decades. In contrast, Charles's image remained fragile, dignified, yes, but distant. It's an old pattern in royal history. The father feels overshadowed by the son. The older generation sees charisma as a threat, not a gift. And the more William shone, the more his father's insecurities surfaced. During one private dinner, an aide overheard Charles mutter, "He's popular now." But popularity fades. The crown doesn't. William heard about that comment later. He didn't respond, not publicly, but privately. It hardened his resolve. By then, Catherine was feeling the strain too. Her role had become a double-edged sword. The press worshipped her, yet the palace scrutinized her every move. When she wore an affordable dress, tabloids called her the people's princess. When she wore designer, they called her elitist. There was no winning. Still, she supported William unconditionally. When his frustrations boiled over late at night, she reminded him of his mother's strength and her warning, "They'll love you until you stop playing their game." He stopped playing, and that's when the walls really started closing in. In early reports, there were whispers of internal investigations, palace staff leaking to the media, certain aides reassigned without explanation. A special task force was formed to oversee communications. William's private secretary was suddenly replaced. The reason? Restructuring. But the truth was obvious. They wanted loyalty, not integrity. Even the atmosphere at family gatherings changed. Conversation became stilted, rehearsed. Charles's glances grew colder. Camilla, ever composed, began offering subtle jabs disguised as jokes. "You know, William, the monarchy has survived for centuries without all this openness." He smiled politely. Maybe that's the problem. Behind that charm, though, he was exhausted. He started keeping notes, a quiet record of every contradiction, every broken promise, every manipulation. Not for revenge, but for clarity. He needed to see it laid bare. And when he looked at those pages, he saw a pattern. The same pattern that had driven his mother to despair. Isolation, discredit, control. It was happening again, only this time, it was him in the crosshairs. What the palace didn't realize was that their strategy was backfiring. Every attempt to undermine him only pushed him closer to the edge. Every whisper made him more determined to expose the truth. He started confiding in one of the few people he still trusted, Princess Anne. Practical, blunt, unshakable. She didn't sugarcoat things. When he told her he was thinking about stepping back, she didn't gasp or scold. She simply said, "Then you'd better have a damn good reason." He did. He just hadn't told anyone what it was yet. Because deep beneath those tensions, deeper than family rivalry or institutional pride, lay something no one dared discuss. Something that had been deliberately hidden, buried in archives, locked away for decades. And it wasn't about power, it was about blood. That's why, when the confrontation between father and son finally came, it wasn't about policy or modernization anymore. It was about identity. A royal identity that might not be as royal as the world believed. And when Charles said the wrong thing that night, a careless, cutting phrase that revealed more than he intended, William realized he wasn't fighting for reform anymore. He was fighting for truth. Because if what he suspected was real, if the documents he'd seen in that sealed room were true, then the monarchy itself was standing on a lie. And that lie was about to explode. But before the explosion came the spark, a midnight argument that would divide father and son forever. The shouting, the silence, the secret that slipped out by accident. It all happened in one unforgettable night. And what Charles said in that moment would not only push William to resign, but also exposed the family's most guarded secret. The secret that began with Diana. It was long past midnight when the king's car pulled into the private courtyard of Kensington Palace. The headlights cut through the fog like blades of light, glinting off the cobblestone driveway. Two royal protection officers stepped out first, scanning the area, then motioned for the king to exit. Charles emerged, wrapped in a dark overcoat, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask to see his son, he demanded it. Inside, William was still awake. He hadn't been sleeping much lately. The resignation letter lay folded on his desk and signed, but the decision in his heart was already made. When his aide announced that His Majesty had arrived unannounced, William didn't look surprised. He simply said, "Let him in." There were no cameras this time, no polished smiles, no ceremonial greetings. Just a father and son standing on opposite sides of a quiet room, lit only by a dying fire. Charles broke the silence first. "So it's true," he said. His tone wasn't angry at first. It was weary, like a man already disappointed before the argument began. William didn't move. "If you're asking whether I intend to step back, yes. It's true. Step back," Charles repeated, his voice tightening. "You mean abandon. You're not stepping back, William. You're walking away. From your duty. From your country." William's jaw clenched. "From a system that's lost its soul." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Charles took a slow breath, as if trying to rein in his temper. "You think the monarchy survives because it pleases you? You think it stands because you approve of it? It stands because people believe in it, and they believe because we endure." "Endure?" William snapped. "Endure what? Lies? Hypocrisy? The same old silence that killed Mum." The king's face went pale. That name, Diana, was still a wound he never allowed anyone to touch. "Don't you dare use her as an excuse," Charles said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Your mother made choices. So did I. So will you. But don't pretend this is about her. It's always been about her." William shot back. "Everything I've done, everything I've tried to change, it's because I watched what this place did to her. How it crushed her until she had nothing left but the truth. And even then, you made her the villain." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Then Charles said, almost softly, "You think you know the truth. But you don't." That sentence stopped William cold. "What's that supposed to mean?" Charles looked at the fire instead of his son. "There are things you don't understand, things your mother never told you." William took a step closer. "Then tell me." The king hesitated. His eyes flickered. Fear, regret, anger, all at once. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said. "She's gone. The past is buried." William's voice was ice. "The past isn't buried. It's rotting in the walls of this place, and everyone can smell it." Charles's composure cracked. He slammed his palm against the mantel. "You will not speak to me that way." "Then stop treating me like a child," William shot back. "I'm not here to play court politics. I'm here because I'm tired of pretending." Charles's tone turned cold again. "Pretending is what keeps this family alive. You think honesty will save you? It won't. It never has." William stared at him, disbelief in his eyes. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound like the men who tried to silence her. Don't compare me to them. Then prove it." The challenge hung between them. The king's breathing grew heavy. The room seemed to shrink as the fire flickered lower. Finally, Charles spoke, quieter now, but with an edge that cut sharper than shouting. "If you go through with this resignation, you'll destroy more than yourself. You'll tear apart everything your grandmother built, everything your mother wanted for you." William shook his head. "You never understood what she wanted. She didn't want the throne. She wanted peace. And look where peace got her," Charles muttered. That sentence froze the air. William's voice dropped to a whisper. "Did you just say that?" Charles looked away. "You don't know what it was like," he said, his tone trembling between anger and guilt. "The press. The pressure. The palace breathing down our necks. You think I didn't love her? You think I wanted her gone? I think you let them destroy her," William said quietly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Then, suddenly, Charles said something that made William's blood run cold. "You don't understand, William. Your mother. She wasn't supposed to tell you." "Tell me what?" Charles realized too late he'd gone too far. He looked like a man trying to swallow words he couldn't take back. "Tell me what?" William repeated, stepping closer. But Charles said nothing. He just sank into a chair, his hands trembling slightly. You're better off not knowing. William leaned forward, eyes burning. What are you hiding? The king's voice broke. I'm protecting you. From what? The room fell silent again. The fire crackled weakly, shadows dancing across the ornate wallpaper. Finally, Charles looked up, his voice barely a whisper. From the truth. William froze. You're talking in riddles, father. What truth? But Charles stood, straightening his coat. His authority reassembled like armor. You've already made your choice. So make it. But when you do, remember this. Once you walk away, you're no longer one of us. He turned toward the door. William's voice cut through the air. You mean one of them? Charles stopped, his back still turned. What did you say? I said I'm not one of them. The people who keep secrets, who lie for convenience, who call it duty when it's really fear. Charles's hand tightened on the door handle. You sound just like her. William didn't hesitate. That's the first honest thing you've said tonight. The door closed behind the king with a soft click, but the silence it left behind was deafening. William sank into his chair, staring at the dying fire. The words protecting you from the truth kept echoing in his head. Protecting him from what? From who? He thought about the sealed letter again. His mother's handwriting, the one he'd found in the archives weeks earlier. It had mentioned unfinished matters, warnings ignored, and one line that now seemed hauntingly clear. One day, they'll tell you something that will make you doubt everything. Don't believe it until you see it yourself. And that's when he knew. Whatever his father was hiding, whatever had driven him to that midnight confrontation, it was connected to her. The next morning, William ordered one of his trusted aides to retrieve all internal files related to the years before his mother's death, especially her private correspondence, anything marked confidential. The aide hesitated. Sir, those archives are restricted by royal order. William looked him dead in the eye. Whose order? His Majesty's, the aide said quietly. William nodded slowly. Then it seems we have a problem. For the next few days, the palace buzzed with tension. The argument between father and son had already leaked in fragments. Heated exchange, family disagreement, emotional meeting. But no one outside knew how deep it went. What the tabloids didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that William was about to defy the king's direct authority and open those sealed archives himself. And when he did, he would find something that would make sense of every lie, every manipulation, every whisper that haunted his family's name. But before that discovery came the betrayal. Because the palace doesn't forgive defiance. And someone very close to William, someone he trusted, was about to betray him in a way that would turn his private rebellion into a national scandal. A betrayal that would leak his every move to the press. A betrayal that would come from within his own circle. And it would begin with one anonymous email. An email that reached the wrong journalist at exactly the wrong time. An email that contained the king's words, word for word, from that midnight confrontation. And once those words hit the press, the monarchy's walls began to tremble. Because the world suddenly knew that behind the pomp and pageantry, the Windsors were at war with each other. And the future king was no longer loyal to the crown. But the worst part was still to come. Because the leak didn't just expose an argument. It exposed something else, something no one expected. A private document. A signature. A reference to a name long erased from royal records. And that name would lead William to the truth his father feared most. The truth hidden deep beneath Buckingham Palace, in a file marked Diana, restricted. And that discovery would change everything. It started with a single email. No subject line. No signature. No traceable origin. Just an attachment, a PDF file marked Transcript, Private Meeting, Kensington Palace. The timestamp read 12:47 a.m., 2 nights after the confrontation between the king and Prince William. The recipient? A mid-level journalist at a small online outlet known more for gossip than real reporting. But within hours, it would become the most explosive story in Britain. The journalist almost deleted it, thinking it was another fabricated royal rumor. Then curiosity won. She opened the file and froze. Inside were detailed notes from the midnight meeting, written like a verbatim transcript. Every word, every silence, every accusation. Even the part where Charles said, "I'm protecting you from the truth." She knew it was real, because no forger would dare invent something that dangerous. Within hours, the story went live. Inside the midnight confrontation, King and Prince William in explosive clash over hidden royal secret. The palace woke up to chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Advisors scrambled through corridors. Legal teams gathered before dawn. By breakfast, the story had spread across every major outlet in the country. Buckingham's communications director reportedly threw his coffee across the room when he saw the headline. "How the hell did they get this?" he shouted. That meeting was private. There were no aides in the room. But someone had been listening. A single recording device, disguised as part of a decorative lamp, had captured the entire exchange. And whoever planted it knew exactly where to send the evidence. By the time the royal staff realized what had happened, it was too late. The transcript had been mirrored on thousands of websites. Clips were already circulating on social media, dramatic readings, voiceover analyses, conspiracy videos claiming a royal cover-up. For the first time in decades, the public saw behind the curtain. And what they saw wasn't glamour or grace. It was a family at war. The damage was immediate. Poll numbers for the monarchy plunged overnight. Hashtags like #RoyalReckoning and #InTheCrown trended for days. Talk shows debated whether the institution had any moral authority left. But inside the palace, the reaction was far darker. The king was furious. "Someone has betrayed this family," he said during an emergency meeting, his voice low but trembling with rage. "And I want to know who." Eyes darted across the room. Advisors, private secretaries, communications staff. Everyone knew what it meant when the king wanted answers. People would lose their jobs. Some might lose much more. The investigation began immediately, quietly, but ruthlessly. Emails were combed through, security footage reviewed, staff questioned under oath. Within hours, suspicion fell on the one person who had the most to gain, Prince William himself. They called it a calculated act of rebellion. William's phone was flooded with calls he didn't answer. His aides tried to protect him, insisting he'd been asleep that night, that he hadn't spoken to any journalists. But the palace machine had already made up its mind. For days, the king refused to speak to his son. Instead, he sent messages through intermediaries, cold, formal notes that began with His Majesty requests clarification. William ignored them all. He wasn't angry about the leak, not yet. What unsettled him was how much of it was accurate. That meant someone inside his own circle had access to his private spaces. Someone close enough to plant that device. He thought about everyone who'd been in and out of the office that week. Assistants, security staff, communications liaisons. And one name lingered in his mind. Someone he trusted implicitly. It couldn't be, he told himself. Not her. But when he confronted his aide, the truth came out faster than he expected. "I didn't mean for it to go public," she said, tears in her eyes. "I thought I was sending it to the press office to warn them what might happen. I didn't know it would leak." William's expression hardened. "You recorded me without my knowledge. You sent a private conversation to someone outside this family. What did you think would happen?" "I thought it would protect you," she whispered. He didn't respond. He just turned away, staring out the window, jaw tight. Outside, cameras were already swarming. Helicopters hovered over Kensington, reporters camped by the gates. The story had taken on a life of its own. Every hour brought new headlines. William accuses king of hypocrisy in explosive showdown. Protecting you from the truth. What did the king mean? Royal family imploding behind palace doors. But amid the noise, one paragraph in that leaked transcript drew the most attention, the one containing a name. A name the royal family hadn't publicly spoken in decades. Diana. In the transcript, William accused his father of letting them destroy her. But the line that followed was what shocked everyone. "You don't understand, William. Your mother. She wasn't supposed to tell you." That was the sentence that set off a frenzy. What wasn't she supposed to tell him? What secret did Diana know and try to warn her son about? Within days, journalists began digging. Old interviews, forgotten letters, archived footage, anything that could connect the dots. And what they found reignited the greatest mystery of modern royal history. Conspiracy theories exploded. Some claimed Diana had discovered something that threatened the monarchy's legitimacy. Others believed she'd left evidence hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. The palace's attempts at damage control only fueled the fire. In a hastily prepared statement, the communications office described the transcript as misrepresented, incomplete, and taken out of context. But they didn't deny its authenticity. That was their mistake. Because when you don't deny, You confirm. By the end of the week, Buckingham Palace had become a fortress under siege. Journalists outside, protesters at the gates, drones overhead. The monarchy had never looked so fragile. Inside, the atmosphere was unbearable. Staff whispered about resignations. Advisors clashed over strategy. Some wanted to publicly discredit William, leak stories questioning his stability, his judgment. Others warned that such a move would destroy the monarchy completely. Camilla, according to one insider, was the only one who seemed calm. She poured herself a drink during a crisis meeting and said softly, "This was always going to happen. Diana's ghost never left this palace." Her words chilled everyone. William, meanwhile, was miles away, at Sandringham, where his mother had once spent her happiest Christmases. He wanted space, but the irony wasn't lost on him. The same estate that once symbolized royal tradition was now his refuge from it. There, away from the chaos, he replayed that midnight argument in his mind. Every sentence, every pause, every word his father had tried to swallow. "You don't understand, your mother wasn't supposed to tell you." It kept circling back. What secret could his mother have known? One so dangerous it had to be erased. That's when he remembered the archives. Weeks earlier, he'd seen references to something called Operation Ecliptic, a restricted file, sealed by royal decree, labeled with his mother's initials. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. But now, it seemed like the missing piece. If that file contained what he suspected, correspondence, evidence, or something even deeper, then it was no longer just a personal issue. It was a matter of truth. And William was done being lied to. He made a call, not to palace staff, not to legal counsel, but to a single person he trusted outside royal circles. A journalist his mother had once confided in years ago. "I need your help," William said quietly. The voice on the other end hesitated. "You're serious?" "Completely." There was a pause. Then, "If you go down this road, there's no coming back." "I'm already gone," William said. Meanwhile, back in London, the king was furious. Behind closed doors, he accused his son of orchestrating the leak. "He's trying to burn the institution down," Charles told his advisors. "He's become his mother's son in every sense." The phrase spread like wildfire, both an insult and an admission. But William didn't care anymore. He'd crossed the point of no return. The only thing left was to find proof, the truth his father claimed to be protecting him from. And to do that, he had to break into his own family's archives. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Access was restricted by royal protocol, with security measures tighter than most government buildings. But there were still a few people loyal to him, people who remembered Diana, people who wanted her story finished. 2 nights after the leak, William returned to London under the cover of darkness. He used a private entrance, the same one his mother once used to avoid photographers. He carried no guards, no aides. Just a keycard and determination. The corridors were silent. Portraits of ancestors stared down at him, ghostly witnesses to a legacy built on silence. He reached the door marked Archives, Restricted. He swiped the card. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air was cool, still, almost sacred. Rows of cabinets stretched into darkness. Files labeled by decade, name, and classification. And there, under a beam of flickering light, he saw it. A sealed folder, stamped with a faded crown insignia. Across the front, in red ink. Operation Ecliptic, Confidential. He picked it up slowly, his pulse racing. When he opened it, a letter slid out, written in familiar handwriting. His mother's. It began simply. "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then what I feared has come true." But before he could read further, footsteps echoed down the corridor. He froze. Someone else was there. "Sir," a voice called softly. It wasn't an aide. It wasn't a guard. It was his father. And this time, the king wasn't alone. 2 security officers stepped forward. One of them reached for the folder. "Put it down, William," Charles said quietly. "You don't know what you're doing." But William didn't move. "Actually, father," he said, his voice steady. "For the first time in my life, I do." That moment, a son standing face to face with his father, holding the truth the monarchy tried to bury, would become the turning point. Because what was inside that letter would not only confirm Diana's greatest fear, but expose the lie at the heart of the royal bloodline itself. And once it came out, no crown, no oath, no title would ever repair the damage. But before that revelation could unfold, something unexpected happened. Something that changed the course of William's plan forever. When the world saw her, they saw perfection. The poised smile, the calm grace, the immaculate posture beside her husband as flashbulbs flickered like lightning. To the public, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was the embodiment of royal elegance. Unshaken, unwavering, unbreakable. But beneath that flawless exterior was a woman balancing on the edge of collapse. The morning after the leak, Catherine woke to the sound of reporters outside the gates. Their voices echoed through the frosted windows like a swarm of angry bees. The world was demanding answers. And she didn't have any. William hadn't come home the night before. He'd disappeared after the confrontation at the archives, leaving only a brief text. "I'm fine. Don't talk to anyone. I'll explain soon." She knew what that meant. Something had happened, something bigger than even she had imagined. And for the first time, she was afraid. Not of the media, not of the monarchy, but of losing him to the same invisible machine that had taken his mother. For hours, she sat in their dimly lit kitchen, tea untouched, her phone buzzing endlessly with calls from aides and advisors. Every one of them wanted a statement. Every one of them wanted her to play the part of the composed royal wife, to project calm while the palace burned. But she wasn't calm. She was furious. She had begged him to be careful, to wait, to think about their children, George, Charlotte, Louis, before making any drastic move. But William's mind had been somewhere else lately, consumed by that letter, by the truth his father refused to tell him. She understood why, but understanding didn't make it any less terrifying. For years, Catherine had watched the royal system wear people down, slowly, politely, invisibly. It didn't break you all at once. It just chipped away at who you were until there was nothing left but what they wanted you to be. She'd learned to play the game better than most. Always smiling, always supportive, always impeccable. Because she knew that one wrong word, one emotional crack, and they'd devour her, the same way they'd devoured Diana. But now, that quiet strength had become her prison. Behind the palace walls, her every move was being dissected. The tabloids wanted to know if she stood by her husband. Sources close to the family claimed she was deeply distressed, embarrassed, urging restraint. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. In the royal world, truth isn't what you say, it's what they decide you meant. That night, she slipped out of her office and walked down a dark hallway toward the nursery. George's small reading lamp still glowed, a storybook open beside him. Charlotte was curled up with her stuffed toy. Louis's soft snore filled the silence. She stood there, watching them sleep, feeling that familiar ache in her chest. She wanted to protect them, from the world, from the cameras, from the family legacy that had already scarred their father. But how do you protect your children from a kingdom that owns their last name? When she finally went back downstairs, her private secretary was waiting with a folder of press briefings. "The palace has prepared statements," the woman said carefully. "They're asking for your approval before release." Catherine didn't open the folder. "And what am I supposed to approve?" "Messages of support for His Majesty," the aide said softly. "Reaffirming unity. Stability." The usual tone. Catherine gave a bitter smile. "Stability?" She repeated. "You mean denial." The aide hesitated. "Ma'am, it's important to appear composed. The public needs reassurance." Catherine's voice was quiet, but cold. "The public needs honesty. The palace just doesn't know how to give it." She dismissed the aide and sank into her chair, staring at the folder. It was always the same, scripted responses, false calm, rehearsed smiles. She'd spent years keeping the illusion intact, and now she was watching it crumble, piece by piece. What the world didn't know was that Catherine had been fighting her own battles for months, quietly, privately, and always alone. She'd endured endless scrutiny over her health, her appearance, even her parenting. Every time she looked tired, tabloids speculated. Every time she wore something new, bloggers analyzed it like prophecy. Every whisper became a headline. But none of that compared to what went on behind closed doors. The strain between father and son had bled into every aspect of royal life. Events were tense, dinners awkward, family gatherings hollow. Catherine tried to mediate, to bridge the gap, but she could feel the coldness growing. Once, during a reception at Windsor, she'd overheard two senior courtiers whispering as she passed. "She's too involved," one muttered. The wife's feeding his rebellion. The word stung. But worse than the insult was the realization that they were partly right. Because she was feeding it, not with manipulation, but with love. Every night, she told William he wasn't crazy for questioning things. Every morning, she reminded him that the world deserved better than a monarchy built on secrecy. But she also knew what that conviction could cost him, and her. And now, it seemed, the cost had arrived. She tried calling him again. No answer. She left a message anyway. "Will, it's me. Please, just come home. We'll figure this out. Together." But he didn't call back. By dawn, the palace had gone into full lockdown mode. Security increased. Access restricted. Staff interrogated. Catherine could feel the shift, a new tension, sharp and suffocating. The same kind of tension Diana once described to her closest friends as being hunted by politeness. That morning, she attended a scheduled children's charity event, her first appearance since the leak. She arrived with her usual poise, her smile perfectly measured. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you stand by your husband? Has the king spoken to you? Are you worried about the future of the monarchy?" She didn't answer. She just smiled and waved, her eyes soft but distant. To the public, she looked calm. To those who knew her, she looked hollow. After the event, she sat in the car, staring out the window as the city passed by in blurs of gray. "I feel like I'm living two lives," she murmured. Her driver pretended not to hear. Back at the palace, she received a message that made her heart sink. It was from an anonymous number. "You should talk to him before the king does. He's not safe." Her hands shook as she reread it. She tried calling William again. Still nothing. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She left the palace. No notice. No security detail. No permission. Just a coat, sunglasses, and a driver she trusted. For 48 hours, she vanished. No one knew where she went. Not the press. Not the palace. Not even her closest aides. Some claimed she'd gone to her parents' home in Berkshire. Others said she'd flown to Scotland. The truth, however, was simpler and far more deliberate. She'd gone to the one place the monarchy had forgotten existed, her old life. The small cottage where she used to stay during university, tucked away near St. Andrews. A quiet place, untouched by cameras, where the air smelled like sea salt and wet grass. For 2 days, she didn't check the news. She didn't answer calls. She didn't think about titles or duties or crowns. She just breathed. But on the second night, as she sat by the window listening to the wind off the coast, she found a letter slipped under her door. No name, no address, just a royal seal pressed into red wax. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, a single line in William's handwriting. "I found it, Kate. It's worse than we thought." No explanation, no location, just those words. Her heart sank. She realized then that this wasn't just a family crisis anymore. It was something deeper, something dangerous. And if William was right about what he'd found, then the entire foundation of the monarchy could collapse overnight. But what frightened her most wasn't the truth. It was what they'd do to stop it. She packed her things that night and returned to London before dawn. When she arrived, the palace was in chaos again. Reporters claimed she'd fled in fear. Others accused her of abandoning her husband. The palace issued a vague statement about a private retreat for reflection, but even that sounded hollow. Catherine didn't care. She went straight to William's office. It was empty. The folder, Operation Ecliptic, was gone. One of his aides, pale and nervous, told her he's gone to Windsor. Why? He said he needed to speak with Princess Anne. Catherine's stomach tightened, and was the one royal who'd always stood apart, the quiet observer, the truth-teller. If William was seeking her out, it meant he'd found something serious, something that needed to be verified. But what neither of them knew was that someone else was already one step ahead, watching their every move, waiting for the moment to strike. Because even as Catherine raced to find her husband, another message was being drafted, this time from inside Buckingham itself. A message meant for the press. A statement that would paint William as unstable, reckless, and unfit for duty. The palace was preparing to turn on its own, and Catherine, realizing what was about to happen, made a silent vow. She would not let history repeat itself, not with her husband, not with her children, even if it meant defying the crown. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't just William's fight anymore.